Good afternoon. I'm Juliane Canfield. I'm the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our second day in our two-day conference, Germany, an Inventory of the Now. Today's panel is centering the margins, reimagining national identity, and we are absolutely delighted to have a stellar lineup of four fabulous female voices: Fatma Aydemir, Naika Foroutan, Gabriella Etmektsoglou, and Sylvia Maier, who will moderate this conversation. And they will examine in great detail how we might go about reimagining German national identity so that it may reflect the plurality of all the peoples that currently constitute German society. Before we start, let me thank, of course, our four speakers, my colleagues at Deutsches Haus at NYU, especially Sarah, but also Adriana and Nicole for making this happen. I would also like to thank the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their support of our programs, and of course you, the audience, for making time to join us today. And I know it's difficult with the various time zones, but thanks for making the time to be here and listen and chime in regarding this important and timely conversation. Let me also point out our next event, which will start at 3 o'clock. That's the last event in the conference, and that is a panel conversation about the future, so to speak, a look ahead at Germany after Angela Merkel. And we have another great four speakers. We'll have Christine Landfried, Joyce Moussaïben, Steve Sokol, and Boris Forman. So if you have time, come join again later this afternoon. Next week, we'll have a conference on the theory of the alt-right, so to speak, continuing the conversation we started yesterday with our panel on the rise of the far right in the US and Germany. And one more literary event we're co-presenting on December 14th, if you have time, with Andrea Grill, Jonas Lüscher, Sascha Salzmann, Monique Thuong, and Tess Lewis. And that's the end of the self-promotion. And let me now briefly, very briefly, introduce our four speakers. These are highly abbreviated biographical information, but my colleague Sarah will make the full bio information available to you now through the chat function, so you may read about all the accomplishments of our speakers while I only give you some short information. All right, so here we go. Fatma Aydemir lives in Berlin and has been an editor at the daily newspaper Taz since 2012. Her first novel, Ellbogen, was published in 2017. She co-edited the essay collection Eure Heimat ist unser Albtraum and is currently working on her second novel, Jinn. Gabriella Etmektsoglou has been the director of NYU Berlin since 2010. She holds a PhD in European history from Emory University and is the author of Excess Exploitation of Wartime Greece, 1941 till 1943. She is a founding member of the US National Peace Academy and committed to reshaping higher education, especially global education, so that it becomes a central driver in creating a more humane and sustainable world. And she's a wonderful colleague and, may I say, also friend. And we're delighted to welcome you back to Deutsches Haus at NYU. And I should also say we're delighted to welcome back Fatma, who was an author in our festival Neue Literatur 2.5 years ago. Here is a new friend, Naika Foroutan. She is professor for integration research and social policy at Humboldt University of Berlin, founding director of the German Center for Integration and Migration Research, as well as director of the Berlin Institute for Integration and Migration Research at Humboldt University of Berlin. I should also mention that she is together with Jana Hensel, author of Die Gesellschaft der Anderen, and we are delighted to present an event about this important book next year, probably in January, and this event will be with Jana Hensel and Constanze Stelzenmüller. So join us for that if you can in early next year. Last but not least, also welcoming back Sylvia Maier, an NYU colleague who is a clinical associate professor in the Center for Global Affairs at NYU, where she directs the MSGA concentration in global gender studies, the annual global field intensive to the United Arab Emirates, and serves as faculty advisor to the MSGA Gender Working Group. It's my pleasure to hand things over to Sylvia now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliane, and welcome to our audience, wherever you're joining us from. I hope you're safe and well. It is a great delight to welcome everybody to this afternoon's conversation about centering the margins, reimagining national identity. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, that I have worked on for many years as well. And if I may say, just very personally, I'm absolutely delighted to be working with such an esteemed panel of colleagues, especially women colleagues from Germany and around the world. 2020 has been a year like no other. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't already know. The pandemic has completely upended our lives and has, in a way, served as an X-ray and shown a harsh spotlight on the appalling racial, ethnic, social, and economic inequalities internationally and domestically. The presidency of President Donald Trump and other right-wing populists like him around the globe, the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor have, if there is a very small, silver lining, if you will, a long overdue global racial justice movement that spotlights the violent structural racism that communities of color have been forced to endure. And as part of this global justice movement, we have been forced as societies to hold up a mirror to ourselves here in the United States, in Europe, in other countries around the world. And we had to ask ourselves, who are we? Who is we? What do we stand for? What are our values? What is our identity? These questions are, of course, not new. Migration, European integration, and globalization have turned many countries, we're focusing on Europe today, into pluralistic, dynamic, multicultural societies over the last roughly 60 years. And the countries, the leadership, as well as the communities, the individual members, have grappled with the question how to accommodate this diversity. What should be and what are the contours of such a multicultural society? And what should this new identity look like? About 10 years ago, I think it was in 2010, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that multiculturalism has utterly failed. But the question remains, what should replace it? What is this new form of identity, or what is this form new of coexistence? What should a new multicultural Heimat look like? Certainly, we have seen a return to neo-assimilationism in German, in Dutch, in Austrian, and other integration policies. One of my personal intellectual heroes, Professor Tariq Modood, who is British, calls for a multicultural nationalism. And I wonder, is that a possible model for Germany, the country that we're discussing today? I am absolutely delighted now to turn things over to my dear colleague, Gabriella Etmektsoglou, who will, along with colleagues Fatma and Naika, give us about a 5-minute introduction and overview of German society, snapshot of the diversity that that makes up Germany. And after the introductory remarks, we will go into a conversation amongst each other and then with you, our audience, in which we delve a little deeper into some of the other questions about how we can center the margins, how can we reimagine a German identity, who should be the driver, what should be the role of institutions, what, for instance, is the role of women in this process. So without much further ado, I would like to turn it over to Gabriella.
Thank you very much. I'm waiting for my slides to appear. It's been an honor to be part of this conversation already. We started a little bit before you joined us, and hello to everyone I cannot see. Thank you for taking the time. I must say that I did not expect to be talking about German identity, be writing about German identity, and being in Germany when I studied history as a graduate student at Emory University. So be open to surprises. I will start with a bit of an inventory, since it's also the name of the title of the general conference, Inventory of the Now. And Sylvia photo, which is a collage from the 2020 exhibition Umbruch Ost, Lives in Transition. Actually, there's a very interesting catalog you can order online, and you can even order the exhibition itself. You can buy it, print it out, and displayed. This exhibition has something relatively new. It combines a very complex perspective of stories of hope, new beginnings in the 1990s, despair, collapse, solidarity, divides, all in a sense connected in ways that are relatively new. And for example, I'd say it would have been, or I don't remember seeing it in an important official exhibition related to gender reunification or unification, a picture of a Vietnamese contract worker, as you see here next to the Reichstag. Race, racism, colonialism, and the exploitation of foreign workers by both Germanys were absent from most conversations about what happened when they all reunited or united. In my view, before discussing how German identity can be reimagined, and I'm not going to be very positive about the national part, in the 21st century, maybe we don't be thinking so nationally, how are we going to reimagine an identity that is more inclusive as a social construct? I think we have to first recognize, and I have listed some keywords, and I didn't even put on purpose German national identity together. It just didn't feel for me right to do this. I put some words that for me identify German identity as it continues to be today: fragmented, ambivalent, and a negotiation. Most identities are fragmented and ambivalent, but I think the German identity is at this point in particular is such a situation. But first, let's go to a micro level inventory that might be useful for our audience. Oops. I don't see really the little things that I can tell that I'm moving my slides. Yes, that's the right one. So as you see, let's begin with who are the Germans when we talk about Germans. There are 87 million people about. 3.4 of them live outside Germany, mostly in the US, the UK, Switzerland, and Austria. And of these, 2.7 are working age. Many of them are well-trained and hold positions of responsibility. Sadly, we know very little about their Germanness. It would have been helpful to see how, if they have renegotiated their identity, that would be something we could have learned from them for what we are doing in Germany today. German population in Germany within the German state is about 84 million. But as you see here, only private households have been considered in this analysis. So the actual population of migration background, which has become a problematic term, it actually is used quite often with clear racial, not even connotations, but attacks. I'm using it here because of statistic, for whatever limited statistic value that it has, but it's important. So as you see, a very large number of people living in Germany today, every fourth person actually, 26% of so-called migration background. That means that they are not born with German citizenship, or that one at least one of their parents was not born with German citizenship. This percentage is 29% for West Germany. Oops. And 8.2% for East Germany. So you see in this map how different the representation of these identities are in the two parts of Germany. And you also see here what are the major nationalities represented in this number that I mentioned before. So roughly about 52% of the persons with migration background are German citizens. The remaining are foreigners. This is also a very large percentage compared to other countries. And the number of people with migration background is estimated to increase because right now about 40% of children under the age of 5 have migration background. So when we look at all these numbers, the next question I think to ask would be, what does it actually then mean to be German to all these Germans? Given the fact that 60% of persons from migration background migrated to Germany themselves, who have not been born here, the German foreign population has doubled since 1990, and that 1.7 million refugees and about 450,000 asylum seekers have mostly arrived since 2014. To ask for a definition of German national identity is not a theoretical question, but an essential place of knowledge to people who must take integration courses, pass naturalization tests, or who simply want to belong to their new home and want to feel accepted. It is also a challenge to people who are ambivalent themselves about who they are becoming in the past 30 years and who they want to be. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, a new study has shown that a substantial number of participants have no relationship with their nation at all. The study explored how German citizens describe what being German means to them and reveals 4 classes. You see the larger number is heritage-based, focused on language and culture. 26%, they just say, well, I have a German passport. That's the only thing that is German about me. And that's a very large percentage. 19% identify with the constitution, democracy, the welfare state, economic and personal safety. And this is the group that feels more guilty about crimes in the Second World War, the genocide in Namibia, and other parts of German history that are defining still German identity. And 60% embraces all the good and bad things people typically relate with Germans. It's a long list and also very interesting. This is a limited study, but still, it was important to check, are these 26% post-national people? Have they successfully decoupled citizenship from ethnicity and identity? What can we learn from them? So if what it means to be German is so many different things, how do Germans describe to others what does it take to truly be one of us? That's another question that has been asked by a study, that's from Pew. And I think it's also very interesting to see how very few Germans compared to other nationalities feel that being born in Germany plays an important role. So Germany is just over Sweden, but then you see multicultural societies like the US and Canada be so much higher, and other places surprisingly high as well. You see, however, that language plays an important role. Culture is not so particularly special to Germany. Again, you see this at the bottom. But it's also notable to check for people who culture does play a role, what are their politics? What is the political landscape? How many people who voted for Alternative for Germany believe that culture does play an important role? And I think I will probably skip that. Next slide is also in German and not very helpful for many of you, but there has been a revival of the concept of Heimat and identification with the Heimat. But if you look at the slide, the majority of the people think of Heimat is also zu Hause, my home, my family, my friends, my relatives. Still, and I hope that Fatma will tell us a bit more about the book, Your Heimat is Our Nightmare. Still, there's a revival of this concept. And in fact, the Minister of the Interior has been renamed into the Minister of the Interior, Building and Community. Community is a great term in English. Heimat in German is also a loaded term. And so we are curious to see what kind of projects this ministry now, with this a new title, will support. I personally feel the word itself is a bad choice because it refers back to an identity content of ethnicity, something that the revised citizenship law itself has tried to revisit. So although Germany is such a migration country, until the year 2000, having German ancestors, this jus sanguinis principle played a large role in who could become a German citizen. So only after the year 2000, successive reforms have liberalized German citizenship policies, which are now ranked among the least restrictive in Europe. But have these changes on the macro level produced different possibilities for citizens to reconceive their identity? Not enough qualitative analysis is available to us to date to be able to make some conclusions. The focus on identity, especially since the 1990s, has been the East and West German identities. The two Germanies have developed in very different terms, in terms of politics, economy, ideology, identity, memory cultures, relationships to their colonial and Nazi past, religion, gender roles, visions for the future, approaches to multiculturalism and globalization, etc. The commemoration of the 30th anniversary of German unity tried to address this persisting divide. The exhibition and other fora had already complicated and undermined this. Everything is fine, everybody's happy, and the East Germans are complaining a little. And why are they complaining? So people have been trying to look more seriously and carefully about what is happening in the country. And the government declared, as you see in Wir schaffen das #2, Wir schaffen das, the reunification, Wir schaffen das for the refugees, we can make it, we can make this happen, we can make this be successful. Now there has been an attempt to see how can we then make sure that people will feel respected, embraced, and that the standards of living throughout the country will increase, will be more equal, and disparities will be reduced. It's interesting to see that the focus is on economics in a sense, and recognition, but mostly economics. But the question is, would something like this heal people whose experiences and stories have been airbrushed for about 30 years? So 30 years since the establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany, many continue to ignore the fact that this is a multicultural society, that in this conversation of the German East and West, a lot of people of other identities, very many communities have been left out. And also that we are experiencing a climate change and forced migration that might very well make human flourishing or dignity impossible unless we create supranational political institutions and identities committed to life and social justice. So via Miteinander and all this focus on building community has to be also positioned in what is going in the world around us and what the place of Germany should be in debates of globalization, global identities, and global accountability commitment. I'm going very briefly to slides. I have pretty much finished to show you how we move from Deutschland, ein Vaterland, one fatherland, terms we don't use anymore, and we are the people, into we are so happy to reunify, wir Deutschen, we are happy, but who are the German, into wir miteinander, some effort to include everybody. And you see in this table that the satisfaction of Western East Germans have been increasing, but actually 42% of East Germans see themselves as second-class citizens, and 63% think that the differences between them and the West are greater than what they have in common. I think this is also something to consider when trying to refigure German identity for the future. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And I look forward to discussing the reimagining part in the conversation.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. That was absolutely brilliant. I particularly appreciated how you teased out and how you visualized for us, one, the heterogeneity of German society, which brings us, to the question to be discussed a little bit later. When we talk about marginalized communities, who are these marginalized communities? I found in particular your last slide really, really surprising, not shocking, but surprising, where you showed that 42% of East Germans consider themselves to be second-class citizens. So how do we, create a sense of unity, a sense of, we're all in this together, when even within Germany, just regional, in terms of, regional differentiation, we have such a lopsided sense of belonging. I thought what was also really, really interesting going forward for our conversation is that you showed the high emphasis on language as it's kind of a touchstone, if you will, of identity, and the playing down of national customs and traditions in the context of Germany, especially certainly compared to Hungary and Poland. And finally, and I personally see that as a huge factor, the importance of institutions, especially international institutions such as the United Nations and the European Union and the process of European integration as a creator and as a shaper of identity. So kind of what is the role of external factors in creating a new German identity. And it was really interesting, from the 1960s roughly onwards, how Germany has moved from an ethnic to a civic identity, and how can we start building on that and develop that in a much more inclusive way. I would now like to invite Naika to share with us her research on integration and majority-minority relations in the context of Germany. You will see, dear audience, that there is a little bit of overlap in our various presentations and remarks, which is a great thing because it shows that we're coming at the same topic from different perspectives. So I would now like to invite Naika to share her thoughts with us.
So thank you very much, Gabriella. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm just going to briefly add in my 5 minutes of time a little bit on the new imagination of Germany and how Germany has shaped within the past, let's say, 5 years. What we can see here is that Germany, in fact, has become a key actor in terms of international migration. This is the latest data of 2019. That shows that there has been around about 270 million international migrants in 2019 worldwide. USA is at the top with 51 million international immigrants, which we all would have known already. But what might be kind of surprising is that this slide shows that Germany is second when you look for international migration data. And this, in fact, is a worldwide change in the position of Germany. We can see Germany and Saudi Arabia with some 30 million, then followed by Russia, UK, and the Vereinigte Arabische Emirate. I don't know how you say that in English. Okay, so I think for the German audience also this would be, and I know that they would never have thought that in such a short moment of time they would switch up to second worldwide. And if we have a look at post-migration data when it comes to international refugees, we also can see that Germany is ranking within the top 5 host states. We know that more than 2/3 of all refugees and displaced Venezuelans came from just 5 countries. And we see that Turkey is ranking first and Germany is ranking slightly behind Uganda. So Germany is quite prominent in its role as a new actor in international migration politics. And what Gabriella has also shown is that this is somehow going hand in hand with a hybridization in the country itself. So it's not only its changing image in the world, but it's also its changing image inside. So I'm not going to recount the data on Germany's migration background data, but I would want to slightly show you this picture of having a look of cities changing very much. Like, for example, Frankfurt is a city which already has some 75% children with an immigration background in school. And we also do have Berlin here with some 44%. But if you ask people, I think they mainly would think in Berlin as one of the cities with the highest multicultural identity. And they would merely talk about Nuremberg or Hanover when they want to describe German pluralism. But in fact, it is as it is. Germany has changed in demographic data. It has hybridized very much. What we should know and what would be important for our debate, I think maybe especially with Fatma, is like, for example, the idea that this description of people with a migration background, in fact, is a statistical description. If we have a look at the younger generations here in this country, we have to say that 80% of minors with a migration background have already been born in Germany. So in the US, they wouldn't count as persons with a migration background. They would mainly count as Americans. But here in statistics, we still count them as immigrants or people with a migration background. And what also should be important is that nearly most of them, so 85% of them, have a German citizenship, and even 40% have one parent without a migration background. So whom do we count more when we talk about identity? Do we look at the German part, the German father, the German mother, or do we merely look at the phenotype, at the way people look, at how they are racialized in order to count them and to tell what identity they wear? So also what we have to say is hand in hand with the German change, with its change as a key actor in migration politics internationally and with its hybridization, we also are facing rising anti-immigration sentiments for years, especially since 2015, but there has been stable anti-immigrant sentiments before that. So if you look at that, nearly 43% would say overall there is too much immigration to Germany, and some 30% would say too many immigrants do not conform the German values. So we can talk about what German values are and what people might imagine with this idea. And what we of course can see for quite some time is a rising Islamophobia in Germany. So we had some 40% already in 2016 who would say Muslim immigration should be curbed in Germany. And also in 2016, we had the idea of people fearing that Islam would become too important in Germany. And you might remember the German Minister of Interior saying Islam does not belong to Germany. So also he, in the end, turned his mind and now is pronouncing a different perspective. Still, this is something a lot of people here can remember. So I come to an end because I would want also to somehow discuss this idea of the German changing identity and connecting it also to the question of East Germany and West Germany, and the idea of whether at the moment of these two countries coming together, whether this was a crucial moment for somehow kicking the idea of multiculturalism out of the German narrative and somehow pointing together that a true German could not be a person who has been born somewhere else outside one of those two countries. So we could discuss that further, but this is actually not what I'm researching at the moment. Actually, at this very moment, I am researching very much similarities between East Germans and people with migration backgrounds, especially Muslim people. We did a huge study at our institute where we somehow compared stereotypes that West Germans would use in describing East Germans and which they would use in describing Muslims. And we found astonishing similarities when it comes to questions of belonging and stereotypes of extremism and stereotypes of somehow not reaching to become a real democrat. And what I brought you here is one of our latest studies that we did where we looked into elite positions in society, and we count some 26% East Germans and some 26% people with a migration background in this country. And there, I'm not counting that, and this is a German slide, I'm sorry for that, but you can see how they are somehow represented in politics, how they are represented in economic positions, or for example, in law or military. And you just can see it from above to from the bottom to the top, that overall there is a constant non-representation of either East Germans or people with a migration background in top elite positions in this country. And I would say that persisting inequalities is something that Gabriella already pointed out to. And this is mainly something that we should discuss when we want to know about how to reimagine the margins of this country. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Naika, for that. That was absolutely fabulous. And thank you in particular for driving home what I thought were three key points. One was the hybridization of identity in Germany, and not just in Germany, but our focus is Germany today. And what does that actually mean? What does hybridization mean? Is one half and half? I'm half Austrian, half German. So what does that mean? Or what are we talking about percentages? Are we talking about what are we talking about when we talk about hybridization? Your second point that I thought was incredibly important again is the role of institutions, the state. Schools, the education system, to undo the harm and the damage that has been done in the process, over the last, let's say, 30 years, in fostering consciously or subconsciously parallel societies in Germany that has then fostered this rise in anti-Islam, in Islamophobia, and in xenophobia. So maybe we could also speak in the next rounds about, what best practices can we look to that have tried, with the German state, with the German government has tried to break up this binary of us versus them. And then very interestingly as well, your study of stereotypes and the similarities actually between East and West Germany vis-a-vis minority cultures and minority communities, immigrants as well as refugees. And what can we do to resist these inequalities? So you gave us a lot to think about as well, and to reflect on in our next two rounds. So thank you, Naika. And last but not least, I would now like to turn it over to Fatma, a journalist and a writer who has engaged very intensely in her writing as well as in her reporting on the question of German identity. Fatma, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you, Naika and Gabriella, for your very interesting inputs. I didn't prepare any slides. I will just say some words, speaking as a writer, speaking as an artist, a journalist, but also as a daughter of migrant workers in Germany. I want to start out by saying that I struggle a lot with the term German identity, and I also work a lot with this struggle, which means that a lot of my work, my writings, my novels evolve from the question of belonging, a very universal question in the field of literature, actually. And I would say that belonging to Germany is just one of the many spaces or communities that I refer to when I speak of belonging, but also, of course, Germany is a highly political one. When I ask myself who belongs to Germany, the next question that arises in my mind is what is meant by that, actually? Am I speaking of Germany as a nation marked by a territory and borders which were constructed at some point to limit the space within which we live and act based on a certain constitution, or am I speaking of German society the way it is reflected to me via politics, media, and history? Or is Germany simply the immediate space that I live and work in, where my family and friends have a relatively safe life, safe in comparison to other countries maybe that they grew up in, which may be in war or suffering from decades of dictatorship? But does that mean that Germany, just because it has a relatively stable political system, that it is a safe place for minorities? Unfortunately, it is not. I want to mention two major incidents that have happened in the past year, because I think it's very important to speak about this too when we speak about German identity. Two terrorist attacks by right-wing extremists have happened. One was last year in Halle in East Germany on Yom Kippur, where a synagogue was planned to be attacked but after this attack failed because the door of the synagogue was locked and too stable to break down, the terrorist spontaneously attacked a nearby kebab shop, which somehow shows that the targets were Jews and other foreigners or Muslims, and how deeply anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are actually connected. Two people died at this attack, unfortunately, and the other attack occurred in Hanau this February, where the terrorists attacked a hookah bar and killed 19 people. I'm mentioning these two incidents because they are part of the ongoing debate of belonging and identity, and also because both attacks were committed in the name of white supremacy and against the ethnic breakdown of the German people through immigration and the alleged takeover by Islam. So you might ask, why do I choose to dedicate my opening statement to these two extremists while we actually wanted to center the margins in our conversation? Well, there are two reasons for that. The first is that this threat is the current reality of many marginalized groups in Germany, and it can't be overlooked when we speak about national identity and the reimagination of it. And the second is that these extremists are also margins of the German society, but somehow these margins are being centered already by mainstream media and politics. And that's one of the main problems here, standing in the way of a just and plural society, I would argue. There are very obvious links between, on the one hand, the right-wing extremist ideology, which, for example, these two terrorists openly referred to, claiming that immigration and multiculturalism are a threat to German identity. And on the other hand, conservative German politicians, such as the current interior minister, he was an example in Naika's slide, who uses different terms to bring about a very similar message, or we can even say the same message, which is migration is the biggest problem in this country, Islam doesn't belong to Germany, and we have to defend ourselves against immigration into the German social system, quote, up until the last bullet, end of quote. So to get back to the initial question, who belongs to Germany, maybe, this is one of the most controversial questions you could ask right now, because it's a highly embattled field, and also the term German identity is very much poisoned, I would say, by the established political parties who are partly re-establishing Nazi terminology in order to get back votes from these people who also feel like they don't belong to Germany anymore, because they're confronted with a multicultural society that they don't identify with. And by Nazi terminology, I'm actually referring particularly to the term Heimat, which we can maybe talk a little more about later if we have the time, but it's also Gabriella mentioned it before. It's a very loaded term, and it's basically a word that describes an ideal homeland. And it was used as a battle cry by right-wing extremists in the last decades. And it also roots in the NS ideology. And now, since 3 years, is part of the Interior Ministry's official denomination. which is also, yeah, a very symbolic act. And I think that's all I would like to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatma, and really thank you for sharing so much of your personal journey and your personal struggles with us. It is really much appreciated. And thank you also for contextualizing our conversation today in regards to kind of the resistance to creating a more inclusive and diverse and multicultural society, and the appalling rise of right-wing extremism and anti-Semitism. And so very much thank you for that, Fatma. And for the next, and I'm looking at the time right now, we have to conclude at around 2:15, 2:20. I would now like to move into our conversation. I would like to start with 3 questions, one that I would like to pose to each of our wonderful panelists, starting with Gabriella. Fatma concluded her remarks by problematizing the word Heimat, which is one thing that you alerted us to as well, the problematic nature of the word Heimat in kind of the creation of a new form of a German Heimat. So the toxicity of that word and the toxicity of that meaning. Much of your work, Gabriella, has been on the Holocaust and on German history and the German past. And I wonder, would you be willing to talk a little bit about the role of Germany's past in refining or redefining or defining a new identity, please?
Of course, thank you. And I'd like to tie it to a couple of statements and feelings that were shared. But before this, Fatma, I would like to thank you as well, because I try to make this connection that our conversation today feels theoretical and academic, but at the end of the day, we talk about the lives and deaths of people. I was just saying that we talk about, belongingness. I refer to something like, all this paperwork that I have to fill out. But yes, belongingness today in a world with so much terrorism, xenophobia, it's really a very, very important topic. So I think bringing this to the conversation gives it a different meaning to me. You also asked who belongs and in a sense, who can also make that choice, right? When we talk about German identity, what is this thing and who can belong to it? The choice is sometimes some people have the choice on both sides. I can try to come up with a definition and belong, but then other people don't have a choice. So that the matter of choice is also important. And that relates back to your question, Sylvia, and the war, because I think we have to admit, at least that's my understanding, that Germany became multicultural not by choice. It wasn't by accident, but I think they really didn't want, after the Second World War, to become a multicultural society. In some ways, although we constantly talk about the war and the Holocaust, I think we forget that in 1945, not everybody who had supported this horrible system was dead, buried, or in a prison. A lot of West Germany was a continuation of this regime. Denazification wasn't a very successful process, maybe a little bit better in East Germany than in the West, but then the East Germans appropriated for them or decided they had only been the victims, there had only been great anti-fascist, and everybody who was a Nazi was in the West. Re-education happened. There was a lot of commitment of a lot of people to make this a functioning democracy, but minorities, diversity, otherness, one could not and were not embraced overnight. It takes time to re-educate somebody who run extermination camps. And a lot of people who, so when you look at one of my slides, the percentage of foreigners in the West in 1950 was 1.1%. And many of them were displaced people. Now we're talking about Germany becoming one of the most multicultural countries, and the numbers increased very quickly since the 1990s. So the history plays a role in terms of us not forgetting what the society has been socialized in and how the socialization over generations has had an impact. We have neo-Nazis, they're all over the world, but here in Germany, this has a very different meaning. It also has an impact on, and an explanation maybe, because this 26% that I referred to have no connection to the nation. This is such a loaded nationality. I personally, many years ago, they had offered me a passport, a German passport. I said like, no, sorry. And I don't want to insult the feelings of any German citizen, but I would have never felt that I want to have a German passport. I applied for one later when I found some things in Germany I could associate with. But to be connected with a perpetrator nation, also generations later, is a burden. And if you take this very seriously, your entire life is a commitment to remembrance. And that's not a very easy place always to be. It's also not a very attractive identity for others. This as history is also something that is projected by others constantly to new Germans of any probably ethnic background. Quite often, even I, when I land sometimes in Athens and I speak German with the person who is with me, immediately will be like, oh, the Nazis came again, have landed. So the projection of this history that never really ends influences a lot how Germans are seen, how some Germans are seeing themselves, and how some other Germans are, in a sense, reminiscent of some, what we'll consider a criminal, ugly identity, but for them, it's a moment of their greatness.
Thank you so much for that, Gabriella. And if I may ask just a very tiny follow-up question. You've also worked in how Germany is perceived, is perceived by others, as you alluded to. And I wonder, do you feel that the way that Germany, both institutionally, as a nation, as a country, I should say, as well as individually, has dealt and atoned for the past, do you feel that that is kind of a role model, possibly for other countries that are dealing with questions of transitional justice?
I think I partly will, for some level, will agree with Susan Neumann, learning from the Germans. I think the culture of remembrance has been exceptional, with a lot of things that have not been appropriate, but still compared to other countries, I think Germany, and it was initially not, their idea. Initially, the Germans had been forced to re-educate themselves, had been forced to remember in the West, much more than in the East. But then they embraced a large part of the society, especially the generation that was shocked by the exhibition Crimes of the Wehrmacht, that start questioning their grandparents and parents about their Nazi past. That generation was much more committed to remembering and atoning. It's never enough. The crimes have been so undescribably horrible that you cannot make up for them with money. And I think that's a huge misunderstanding on the part of the perpetrators and the victims to think that if you pay more money, more reparations, and more remorse and more apologies, it will end. This is not a history that will ever, in a sense, end. And I think, yes, but it's a uniquely difficult situation. And I think it's difficult for Germany that has not embraced the genocide in Namibia until very recently to, in a sense, complete that conversation. I think the genocide in Namibia has entered our school books and our conversations, not even the last 10 years. And there's another conversation for reparations that need to be paid there as well. So a qualified yes, but a lot of work still to be done.
Thank you so much, Gabriella, for that. I completely share your view on that. I do feel that Germany has in many ways rested on its laurels in that regard, and a lot of additional work needs to be done, absolutely. I would now like to turn to Naika and invite her to maybe speak a little bit about the really wonderful research that I've learned as I was preparing for this panel that she has been doing on the involvement of youth in creating and reimagining a German identity, especially youth, young people from multinational backgrounds, third culture kids, some of them. in moving Germany from reimagining a German identity that is young, that is dynamic, that is vibrant. Would you be willing to share a few of the highlights of your research with us, and any best practices, any good news?
Well, actually, yes. We did a big study that we actually named Heimat, but Heimat with Y. We did a study on hybridization of this country and had some 50 qualitative interviews with German Muslims or Muslim Germans, however we decide to call this social group. And we could see that there were a lot of different positionings in terms of belonging. There were people who would describe themselves as kind of truly German. We called them people with a so-called Einheimigkeit. They refused to talk about two different kind of Heimat. They would call themselves either German or whatever other nationality they had. So they would say, no, I'm only one. I might have a German passport, but I do name myself a Turkish woman because this is how I feel I want to be named. Then we had others who would describe themselves as what we call zweiheimisch. So they would describe, I am not either or, I am 100% German and 100% whatsoever, Turkish, Egyptian, Iranian. Then we had others who would call themselves mehrheimisch. So this would also be that they would trade in another form of identity, what Fatma was describing too, because it's not always about national identity, but very different kind of identities. And then we had those who would refuse to call upon themselves any kind of national identity. They would look for what we said, something like Neuheimigkeit. So that would be the idea that some interviewers were mentioning or pointing to, like saying, for years I thought I would have to decide between Moroccan identity and German identity. Now I can say I am Muslim and this feels true to me. There's no kind of national identity that I belong to. And then we had others who would also refuse any kind of national identity and would just point to kind of human self-identification. Ich bin ich, or ich bin Weltbürgerin, or something like this. So we had very kind of different topoi, if you want to say that. And so I could not claim for saying this is how young people develop into, because for now we can also see that a lot of young people point to a kind of a subversive identity as Ausländer. So describing themselves again as Iranian, Turkish, Spanish, whatsoever, because it also has become a kind of a new multicultural chic. It is a subversive moment of claiming a new kind of belonging without trying to assimilate into a kind of a German we. I would actually say this is mainly a question of the second generation who wanted to be seen and described as true Germans, and the next generation maybe has the German base as something that is not so much negotiable and want to point more to a kind of a difference marker also. This is one moment, but actually I also wanted to add that I do not agree so much with what Gabriella was saying. In fact, Germany within the last 5 years in a row has been the most attractive country in the world, also in terms of a national identity. So there has been, in fact, a big change in the German image, especially since 2015. And in terms of embracing multiculturalism, I was thinking about finding any country at this very moment whom I would call as a country that would embrace multiculturalism. Truly, it will not be the United States, I suppose, with 50% voting for Donald Trump. And of course, for not at all, it is France. And it's not UK, and it's not the Netherlands. So all those countries who had for years those imaginary of themselves of embracing multiculturalism has been failing in front of our eyes in terms of racism and anti-Muslim sentiments. And as a matter of fact, I would say the German position in that terms is not so different from all those other countries. And I really would want to, it may be Canada, or it might be New Zealand, and I'm not sure about that for all. And it truly is not Australia with all their refugee politics. So I might think about Canada, but that might be the only country. And so we do not have any Canadian here. But I would say that, of course, the German image cannot be so directly connected, as to my point of view, with the changes that this country has undergone within the last years, to unilaterally connecting it to the Nazi past and explaining it by that.
Thank you so much for that, Naika. That was really fascinating. And two minor points. Canada immediately came to my mind as kind of a model country, that really tries to practice multiculturalism and not just, accommodate cultural diversity and pluralism, but actively practices it both culturally, discursively, legally. And I was particularly intrigued by one of the research findings that you shared, and that is the embrace by the young people that you worked with of the term Neuheimig. I love that word. And also when you said, that you found that many young people, especially of the third generation, it's always problematic. I found the word generation always problematic. Once, you should be, German or American or Austrian, once you're born there or you have citizenship, depending on the legal context. But at one point, do you really become a citizen of that particular country? But the forging of a new kind of belonging by the young people, the third generation kids. And I wonder, I know we may not have the time right now to discuss that, but I would love to learn what the key features of this new kind of belonging are. So, what do the young people, who embrace this Neuheimigkeit, particularly embrace? What do they like about this new Germany? How do they envision this new Germany? And how do they see their place? Do they consider themselves to be marginalized, or do they recognize their own agency as creators of a new identity? Because that's going to be the next generation. In a decade or so, many of the survivors of World War II will not be around anymore, and very few still are. So it's now the creation of something new, and this ties us in a question in the Q&A. And I have one last question to Fatma, and we have a couple of great questions in the Q&A about the role of the media, for instance. What role do the media, like film, art, film, movies, television, other forms of media, social media play in this creation, as well as the embrace of this Neuheimigkeit? And relating it back to Gabriella, a very selfish question in my own mind, note to self to read up on that, is, do young people of the third generation also have this hesitancy towards the word Heimat? Gabriella, you shared with us, that, the toxic nature of the word Heimat, in the Nazi period, pre-Nazi period, but is that still the case? Or are we kind of claiming, or young people reclaiming the word Heimat for themselves? Just one thought, also in the context of your research on hybridity, Naika. And now one question to Fatma that has been really burning on my tongue, as we say in German. Fatma, your book Ellbogen, elbow, for those who do not speak German, deals with the struggles of a young woman who is German Turkish, and I wonder, as a young woman, German woman of Turkish origin, of Turkish migration background, Do you feel that women in particular face a very specific challenges in creating their own new identity? In my own research on multiculturalism, women's bodies in particular are considered the battleground over integration, over belonging. How, in your experience, are women grappling? Are they maybe I should say, are they grappling differently than young men with identity and belonging? Do you see in your own work kind of a greater interest in young women to to become part of mainstream society, or not?
Shall I start? Because there were a lot of questions to all of us.
Whichever way you want to go.
Okay. Yeah. So my book, my first novel was about a young woman, and very generally said her struggle with being, with her struggle with all of this that we're talking about right now, actually, with her identity. But also just her struggle with growing up as a woman in this world, in this society, and just being a young person. What does that make with her? And it's also a book about violence. And your question was, do young women deal differently with a case of identity? I mean, yes, of course, I would totally agree also in this context that women's bodies, like everywhere, or let's say, non-male bodies, are some sorts of battlegrounds for ideological fights. On the one hand, we have the, so the self, on the one hand, I think a lot of young women struggle with the image of, when we speak about Muslim young women, especially with the image of like how Muslim women are, for example. So on the one hand, there's this problem that people imagine Muslim women to wear hijab, but at the same time, actually in Germany, it's very like, even if Naika just said that, Germany is a country that embraces multiculturalism. I don't really agree. For example, if we talk about the role of the hijab and how difficult it is for young women actually to practice any kind of job in any kind of branch wearing a hijab. So this is one thing. And on the other hand, if we look at, for example, more conservative groups of feminists in Germany, there's, for example, an organization called Terre des Femmes, which is very much linked to, let's say, very conservative positions, anti-sex work, hijab. Also, it's quite, there are a lot of racist sentiments also mixed up with this feminist approaches, let's say. The idea of liberating Muslim women from their like oppressive cultures and stuff like that. So I think there are like special struggles that women face, but I wouldn't say that young men are having it easier, to be honest, like from my perspective. And I did a lot of school readings, for example, also with my book, which was included also in the syllabus of a lot of schools. And I had the chance to talk to some of my young readers, and I thought it was very interesting talking to boys and girls and everybody, hearing that many of them told me, actually, like, I'm talking about 15, 16, 17-year-old students, that actually was, for many of them, it was the first novel that they really wanted to finish and liked reading, the first book they were given in school, because the first time they had the feeling they could identify with the struggle of the protagonist. But also I had conversations with also young readers who said that actually they didn't like it so much because they are tired of hearing sad stories or seeing, another story about an immigrant facing racism and stuff like that. And that's where I come to the role of the media, or the role of storytelling, let's say. I think that's a very valid point and desire to say that we want to see, you know, positive stories or other, let's say, examples. I think, like, I cannot serve all of them, of course, I'm just one writer, but I think we need all of these stories, and I think we need all of these perspectives. And the problem in the media or in the movies and the arts in general, I would say, in the popular arts, is that there is some representation, of course, in Germany, but representation politics always also tend to just take, you know, one person of color into an all-white festival or program to represent diversity, but like diversity actually means something else, and you're just tokenizing one perspective and saying, okay, this perspective talks to 25% of Germany now, and so you should be fine with that. And that's like, for the artist, it's a very big burden and really not something that I want to be in. And yeah, for the audience, it's very frustrating too.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Fatma, and also kind of your own kind of the burden, the challenge, the pressures that you're facing as a young artist, as a writer, you know, to be all things to all people, to speak for everybody, that your experience is kind of a universal experience of challenges and not so much of agency. So very much thank you for sharing that. I would now, if it is all right with everybody, and I'm just sharing, yes, Gabriella, would you like to say a little bit? Because I was going to turn it over now to the Q&A. Gabriella, yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Because you had asked before, so I'm a little confused. You had asked us to respond to some questions.
Yes.
Do you still want us to do that, or shall we move on? I just wanted to just comment a little bit on Naika's comment, and maybe as we discuss, as we take some questions from the audience, because I have seen a couple, a little bit contextualize the difference between personal identity and self-identification, and national identity, which is mostly, you know, what we is the title of our panel conversation. And my argument was about the level of national identity. And I'm sure a lot of young people, including some of our former students, want to come back to Germany and live in Germany, and Germany is in high demand. I'm not quite sure how many people, the people who come here, absolutely want to be part of a German nation, of a German national identity, and belong to Germany in that sense. And on the level of high politics, the hesitation of Germany to lead within the EU, the relationship with Israel, the relationship with Poland and other countries, I think the war has still not totally finished. I'm not saying that it plays number one position in the definition of the national identity, but I do think that it plays on that level a pretty important one. I don't think, you know, young Germans, back to the question you had, wake up in the morning and thinking about this, and we see that the knowledge about the Holocaust is becoming less and less significant and less, you know, important for a younger generation. So that the personal level is less significant, I would say.
Thank you so much for clarifying that really important nuance. Thanks so much, Gabriella. We have about 6 more minutes, and there are a couple of wonderful questions in our Q&A chat box. And one is to all speakers, and I quote here, a question to all speakers. Could you address the role of the media in the negotiation of German identity? And I know, Fatma, you have spoken a little bit about this. So maybe, Naika, if you would be willing to share a little bit your thoughts on the role of media in the negotiation of German identity, maybe also related to the topic of our conversation, kind of, is the media helping or hindering, you know, speaking in very binary terms, the creation of a new German identity and the centering of marginalized voices? And then maybe Gabriella, and then Fatma, and then we'll see if we have time for one more. Naika, yeah.
Yes, actually, I'm not doing research on media, so I just can't say so much on that. Maybe, I mean, I could say what everyone would say, like we could use some more diversity in German media. That would be quite a great thing. I showed some some data that we collected on diversity in German media. And of course, you can see clearly that there is no such thing as embracing multiculturalism. And this is, for non-part, something I would say. I'm an empirical scientist and working with a lot of data, and I know that this country is not embracing multiculturalism. The only thing I wanted to say is I cannot imagine of any country at this moment that is embracing multiculturalism, and Germany is in the same row than France, UK, the Netherlands, and all those countries that for years were giving themselves an image of multicultural societies. And if we look at France, it is incredible how high rises of anti-Muslim sentiments in that country that for years has told us a story about citoyenneté and belonging and true Frenchness, which of course has never been true because there is a high inequality in this country, and this is what we are seeing now very clearly. And this is what I wanted to say, that this is a moment where I do not agree with describing it with the Nazi regime when we see that we're facing the same anti-multiculturalism in countries that did not have the Nazi regime. This is the only thing that I wanted to bring into the debate. And therefore, I would say, yes, I mean, we have a lot of alternative media here now. We have new kind of blogs for young people. I mean, I myself, I do have 4 children, 3 of them still going to school, and I'm very much into their conflicting debates on identity, new identity, and describing themselves in kind of cool new waves of immigrants, yeah, with very much into this issue of describing themselves as foreigners. So this is kind of very interesting to me that they do that, even though they have been born here. So if I would do that, I mean, I have immigrated to Germany when I was 12, but for my children, I thought they would describe themselves as German. But to be honest, to them, it is uncool to be German. So they don't want to say they are German. This is a shift in our debates. I think we should somehow acknowledge that there is a new kind of Selbstbewusstsein that doesn't wait so much for ARD and ZDF becoming more diverse. They are creating their own portals of diversity. And maybe this is the new art of talking German today.
Thank you, Naika. I love it. I'm taking copious notes of what you were saying. I love your expression of they're creating their own portals of diversity. And that was precisely what I was hoping a part of our conversation could be about, the focus on agency as opposed to victimization or sense of kind of marginalization, a kind of overcoming, trying to overcome it themselves and creating, as you said, new spaces for themselves. Gabriella and Fatma, would you be willing to kind of add your thoughts to the role of media, or respond to what Naika was just sharing with us? Gabriella, please.
Maybe in general response to Naika, and because I think we are running out of time, I just also find it a little sad that we didn't have enough time to even reach the reimagining level. That goes to show you how much work needs to be done and how complex the topic is. Multiculturalism has been, in a sense, problematically conceived and defined so far, has been not flexible enough in getting people not to simply accept it in their own different boxes, but co-creating. We haven't reached the moment to having enough intense conversations also in the media to begin co-creating. And I think before we reach the national level, civic society, and I have a long list of initiatives, and I know that you know some of these people who've done amazing work, sometimes sponsored by the state, sometimes not, where they are promoting a space of creativity, tolerance, where people can be thinking in terms of a state that's in the spirit of, and the work of John Rawls will be a union of unions, and a civic identity that will be supernatural, beyond just simply the nation state. Thinking about Europe, there is this Citizens for Europe initiative. So some of this comes to the media, but I think the most important work is done in platforms that have not been recognized nationally or internationally yet, but they are there. And maybe we can add some of the links for people to visit the websites. So the media is not just simply the newspapers and stuff, but the media is the space that people can then share information and connect. And this is happening extensively.
Thank you so much for that, Gabriella. This is really great. So I see that there is kind of a meeting of the minds also between you and Naika about, you know, the awareness of these new spaces, the power of these new spaces, and the need to acknowledge them and to elevate them and to highlight and to support them much, much more as fountains or as fonts, not fountains, as fonts of the creation of a new identity. Maybe somewhat, you know, in ways that we haven't envisioned them at all, not looking towards the past and, you know, offering the present and, you know, the possible present in contradistinction of the past, but creating something completely new, and where it's not cool to be German, and that's totally cool. Fatma, a few thoughts. You are working in media. What are your thoughts?
Actually, all the important things have been said. The only thing I could add to to my observation of, let's say, mainstream media and not the social media and other platforms is that me working also in the media part-time, I have the feeling representation has become a very, very big topic in all the houses now. And it is a good thing, but on the other hand, I have the feeling that, like I said earlier too, that representation politics also will lead to a kind of disguise of, let's say, power relationships behind what is visible to us as the audience, let's say. So we make very diverse covers for our magazines, or we have a diverse cast in our television show or whatever, but the problem is that we don't see what's going on behind that. Who's writing the story, for example, under which working conditions people are working there, and who is in the decision-making positions and gets to decide what stories are being told and how they're told and so on. I think representation in the media is important because it influences the way we look at the world. But it's not everything, because as Naika also said, kids don't like wait for the media to present them things to dream of, let's say. They have their own kind of media or approach to reality. So I cannot say that there's like something very progressive going on in the mainstream media right now that changes our lives.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Fatma, for sharing that. I think what you said about the politics of representation, the need to have diversity within representation of the various communities, and who speaks for the community, you know, who is the voice, so to speak, and the visual representer of a particular community is incredibly important. So we do not prioritize or do not elevate the voices maybe of the majority within the minority, but also minorities within the minority voices within the minority, and that is women, that is people who identify as LGBTQ, you know, people of different abilities, for instance. And I think when we talk about recentering or centering the margins, again, my question always is, you know, who is at the margins? I mean, I think we need very clearly an intersectional approach to unpacking this question and to offering and opening together more spaces for the reimagination of a new German identity. It's not just international. We have seen that in the various research projects and the various remarks today. It is very much within Germany. It is very much within the various communities, unpacking and thinking about different types of privileges and positionalities. So we do not reinforce as we go forward existing marginalizations and kind of layers of disempowerment. I know we have to come to a conclusion. I have been given the 30-second this 30-second mark. I would like to thank this brilliant panel, Gabriella, Fatma, and Naika, for their incredibly thought-provoking and thought-stimulating contributions, sharing their research, challenging understandings of marginalization and of reimagining, giving us some hope. Naika, your children sound incredibly cool. You know, opening new spaces and platforms for creating their own identities. And I would like to thank Juliane Kampfield and Sarah Girner for inviting all of us and making this panel possible. I would now like to turn it over for the very last remarks to Juliane.
Thank you, Fatma, Gabriella, Naika, Sylvia, and Sarah in the background for this wonderful and insightful conversation. As Gabriella said, we've seen that there's so much more to look into and to discuss. So I think we'll have to do a sequel to Centering the Margins. And a little bit of a Fortsetzung will be Die Gesellschaft der Anderen, the event we're going to do next year. But there's obviously more Gesprächsbedarf. And we'll have to wrap it up super quickly now because Sarah and I have to run into the next meeting for our look ahead panel at 3 p.m. And if any of you have time to join us, then we'll really know what the future will look like. And again, thanks for making the time, all of you in the audience, and thanks to the 4 of you. I learned a lot, and I think other people did as well. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon and evening or morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Tschüss.